Chapter 3. Parker. Parker looked up at the sign of the building. Ms. Matron's matchmaking service stared back at him. This was it. He had committed. He had paid the bills. His bride-to-be was behind those doors, waiting to meet him. When he first signed up for the matchmaking service for an overseas bride, it had seemed like the perfect solution. Here he was, getting a bride who would do everything necessary to meet the demands of his father's ultimatum of marriage within a month, a pregnancy within the year, and staying in the marriage for 5 years before divorcing. He would, of course, retain custody of his son. She would be handsomely paid for her part of the project and remain in the country as a new citizen. It was a win-win situation. Now the time had come to meet her. The fabled woman who was willing to be part of the cold-blooded marriage he had told the matchmaker Ms. Matron that he wanted. Parker felt a feeling of complete nervousness and anxiety. What stupid idea had gotten into his head to commit to this? Too late now, he told himself firmly. It was 4 days until the wedding. He was going to keep his job, salary, condo, and inheritance. To do it, he needed to meet the terms of his father's demands. He needed to marry. Parker loved his job. He made a difference. Being part of the day-to-day operation of Ramsley Hospital and Medical Corporation was his passion. James Ramsley might think his second son was a bum who couldn't do the job correctly, but Parker wasn't about to give up the position. If he couldn't be a part of Ramsley HMC, Parker didn't know what he would do with his professional life. He enjoyed his career. Besides surfing, it was his passion. There was nothing else to do but go in, he decided. Stepping into the building, Parker went directly to the elevator. He knew what floor the matchmaking service was on. While on the elevator, he noticed a curvy blonde. Maybe it was her. She would be okay, he reflected. When the doors opened to the floor he was going to, she didn't get off. Okay, not her. Parker didn't have time to be picky. There was a ring burning a hole in his pocket and a deadline to adhere to. Ms. Matron had said she was a master of her field. She had taken all sorts of information down and promised the perfect match. It was going to be fine, he assured himself. There was no other option. Not with the scheduled wedding ever so soon. Parker entered the reception area of the small office. He gave the woman a quick, unfelt smile. "Parker Ramsley." "It will be just a moment," she smiled warmly. "If you'd like to have a seat." Parker didn't like waiting. As a member of the prestigious Ramsley family, he rarely ever waited for anyone. However, the matchmaking service made no exceptions and treated all their clients the same. Parker had a seat in the waiting area, just like every other client. He ignored the various magazines which were available to peruse. Instead, he checked his phone again. His secretary had cleared the entire day for him. She had also suggested he take flowers to meet his soon-to-be wife. Parker had thought the suggestion a little too cheesy. This was a business contract between himself and his bride. Flowers weren't necessary. He had brought the ring after confirming the size. "Mr. Ramsley?" came Miss Matron's pleasing voice. The plump, graying woman gave him a matronly smile. Parker stood and gave her a nod of respect. "It's good to see you again, Miss Matron." She ushered him into an office. "The results from the fertility clinic are back. Everything went well, and she's been deemed perfectly fit to conceive children." "Good." Uncomfortable, Parker cleared his throat. He didn't like talking about his future wife this way, but it was necessary. He needed to know if there were going to be any issues with having a child. It was a condition of their marriage. He was getting married. He was tying himself to an absolute stranger in just 4 days. Parker dragged himself out of his thoughts. "Is there anything else I should know?" "The family has come for the wedding," warned Miss Matron. "They're a little rough around the edges, but well-meaning. Her uncles are especially pleased to meet you." Parker had the feeling Miss Matron was leaving something out. "And?" "I talked to the office overseas," admitted Miss Matron. The impression might have been given that you were willing to sponsor the entire family. Parker stared at her for a moment. This wasn't part of the bargain. What? Not the uncles, she hastily replied. The mother and the bride's younger sisters. The mother is a widow. She has no sons. The uncles are looking for someone to support the woman so they don't have to. So they're just foisting her off on me, he wondered. It's how their culture works. You're marrying the daughter, Miss Matron reminded him. She comes with her unwed mother and siblings. How many sisters? Parker ground out. 2. They're very quiet and well-behaved, quickly inserted Miss Matron. The uncles are insisting it's part of the match, or they'll renege on it. They come from a part of the country which is a little backward and traditional. Women are not allowed jobs outside the home in their particular culture. He had no time to search for another bride. The wedding was just days away. Fine. I'm sure I can afford a condo or something for them. We will figure it out. Excellent, breathed Miss Matron in relief. I have all the paperwork ready. I'm sure she'll be relieved to have some immediate family nearby. True, reluctantly agreed Parker. He supposed he would appreciate it if he had his brothers with him, if he were to move to a whole new country. Not that he had any intentions of ever leaving his home for any extended period of time. Her name is Adriana Karina Bacui. She's very shy, but an agreeable young lady, noted Miss Matron. Shall we go meet her? Parker took a deep breath and nodded. Miss Matron led the way to a second office. The room was crowded with a number of men, perhaps a dozen of them, spanning anywhere from 15 to 50, standing around the perimeter. All of them had dour looks as they measured him. 2 women and 2 girls, perhaps pre-teens, sat quietly on the couch. Their heads were bowed. While the elder woman's hair was covered with a scarf, the other females had the same strawberry blonde shade. One of the men grunted something. The woman gave her mother's hand a squeeze, then stood before him, clasping her hands in front of her, fidgeting with her fingers. Pasting a smile on her face, she lifted her chin, darting a quick glance at him to reveal amber eyes before looking down again. She was thin, almost too thin in Parker's opinion. He realized she was trembling. Everyone was looking to him to make the first move, to say something. He cleared his throat. Could I please speak to Adriana alone? One of the younger men said something in another language. Parker didn't follow. He had no gift for foreign languages. He looked at Miss Matron in confusion. One of his stipulations was that his bride would be fluent in English. There was a response from one of the older men, and they all seemed to frown a little more. The younger man came back with a heavily accented, "No, it is not done. You will be alone with her once you are wed." How on earth was he supposed to find out if she were a willing participant in all of this? Parker wondered. An unwelcome sensation came to him. It felt like he had just bought a woman from the slave market. Parker felt dirty at the thought. What had he done? How did anyone fix something like this? "Miss Matron, could we have a word?" "Yes," nodded Miss Matron. They stepped outside, Miss Matron gently closing the door behind them. Parker ran a hand over his jaw. "It was unexpected that all of the uncles and some of the cousins would come," she began. "I understand it can be quite intimidating." Parker cut her off. "Is that poor girl in there being coerced into this?" "She is 26, Miss Matron calmly reminded him. "This is probably her last chance to be married. In her culture, she's considered quite old for a wife. If she remains unwed, she will be a charity case and an afterthought in her family. This wedding not only helps her, it also helps her mother and sisters. I would assume you will be treating them with more consideration than her uncles would." "This is despicable," breathed Parker. "How can they put her in this position?" "This is a contract deal," firmly stated Miss Matron. "You have your stipulations. These are hers." "I don't know what I expected, but it was definitely not this," muttered Parker, glancing back at the door. You were expecting some cold American-like socialite to take you up on your crazy offer, interjected Miss Matron in a clipped voice. It was an unrealistic expectation. I found you what worked within your stipulations in your time frame. This girl needs a new life. You can be the one who gives it to her. She has every motivation to keep you happy. This is a good match, Mr. Ramsley. It was bordering on criminal, in his opinion. Parker's stomach bottomed out, and he hoped he wouldn't be ill. He didn't want his bride to be some scared wisp of a girl who was doing this just so her sisters could have a better life. She was some sort of martyr, and he felt like he was the ogre she was sacrificing herself to. This isn't right, Parker managed to say. He was on the edge of losing everything. The job he loved, his passion in life. If he turned this down, there would be no going back. Parker wasn't going to fool himself. James Ramsley wouldn't soften his stance on his demands. It was either be married in 4 days and secure his future, or walk away and lose everything that mattered. I need to be able to talk to her, to find out if this is really what she wants without those men staring at us. They might let her talk to you with the mother present. I will ask, agreed Miss Matron. Okay. Parker cleared his throat, shoving his hands in his pockets, then taking them out again. His mother harped when he put his hands in his pockets. It was something he had not done in ages. It was a sign of how Parker didn't feel in control of the situation. Miss Matron left him in the small hallway, shutting the door behind her as she went to talk to Adriana's family. Adriana. His bride finally had a name. She was a person with feelings and worries and concerns just like him. Would he do the same for his brothers? Cast himself at the mercy of a stranger in hopes of making a better life for them? Parker wasn't a fool. He knew there was a large imbalance of power here. Adriana could only hope Parker would be fair and kind to her and her family. Any other man could easily play the monster and win. Parker wasn't that type of guy. I'm sorry, Miss Matron spoke. They insisted one of the uncles accompany her. I don't think he knows much English, though. Parker gave a jerky nod. A moment later, Adriana and one of her uncles joined him in the hallway. They all stood around awkwardly. Are you certain you wish to marry me? Managed Parker. He wasn't sure it was the right question to ask, but now it was done. She gave a small, quick nod, still not meeting his eyes. I could sponsor you, your mother, and your sisters into the country, he offered, wincing slightly. The selfish part of him wanted to just accept the marriage and keep his personal and professional life intact. The better part of him understood he couldn't just do that blindly, that marriage would change things. You don't have to marry me if you don't want to, Adriana. My uncles would never allow it. Her accent wasn't as thick as the other man who had spoken before. Her voice was quiet and sweet. She glanced up at him, a touch of what could be fear in her eyes. If there is no marriage, they will take me home. She really didn't have an option then. Parker wondered if he said no to the marriage, what would happen to her and her family. He felt like it might be an impossible choice. Miss Matron says you must marry, began Adriana hesitantly. She says you must have a son. Or a daughter, he said absent-mindedly, even though Ramsleys had a habit of producing boys. Do your sisters understand English as well as you do? Yes, nodded Adriana. They will need to go to a good school, mused Parker, trying to focus on something outside of his bride and him. I will see if Livingston Academy has any openings. If they get in, they'll have a better chance at a good secondary school and a good college. College? Her tongue tripped over the word. Parker looked at her, ready to offer an explanation, when he realized her reaction wasn't because she didn't know the word, but was because she had not expected him to offer post-secondary education to her siblings. She was looking at him in absolute surprise. At least she was looking at him and not at the floor, he acknowledged, deciding it was some improvement. "Yes, college. Do you think they would want to go?" "Yes," breathed Adriana, hope in her eyes. "Very much so." He wondered how much education she had gotten. It didn't matter. If she wanted to continue learning, she could. Parker could easily do that for her. "I know you expected probably someone prettier and younger," blushed Adriana, looking at her clasped hands again. "I promise I will be a good wife." Parker had no doubt the timid young woman in front of him would do everything she could to be a good wife. The question for the first time was, would he be a good husband to her? Then again, if he wasn't her husband, what would happen to her? Would the uncles just find another person to foist her off onto? The thought didn't sit well with him. He supposed he was partially responsible for her situation. Parker would figure out a way to make this marriage work. Now he was facing the person who would be his bride. Parker decided she needed someone who would protect her, plus put some of her wants and needs first. He could do that much, Parker vowed. He pulled the engagement ring out of his pocket and reached out for her left hand. "Adriana?" The uncle snaked out a hand, grabbing Parker's by the wrist and uttering a sharp rebuke. "He says you cannot touch me until the wedding," softly stated Adriana. Parker gave the man a leveling look. Her uncle finally let go of his wrist. Instead of reaching for Adriana's hand, he offered her the engagement ring instead. "Will you marry me?" "Yes." She shyly took the ring, careful not to touch him before putting it on her finger. Her amber eyes lifted to his, and Adriana gave him a small smile. Parker, who had hoped his world wouldn't change, realized it just had. Everything was different. He wasn't just acquiring a wife. He was going to have to be part of this marriage. He hoped their union might just work out for the both of them. It was both a frightening and comforting thought. If you enjoyed this chapter of The Wedding, Book 10 of the Ramsley Brothers series, please consider liking this video or sharing it with others. This helps with the algorithms and helps me to get visibility to my YouTube channel. Thank you, and I appreciate it. Happy listening.